Hello, my name is Michael Sapp, and I will be speaking on Profile of a Serial Murderer. Imagine being a pretty young woman who is at the grocery store and sees a handsome, charming young man with a cast on his arm. You feel bad for him as he struggles to carry out his groceries, and you offer to help him, not knowing he is a sadistic killer known as Ted Bundy. Bundy would indeed lure his victims with a fake cast or sling on his arm in order to get them to feel sorry and assist him with his groceries to the vehicle out of plain sight. Then, Bundy would use a tire iron to knock his victims out and take her to an unknown location to rape and then kill her. The majority of the population does not know the characteristics of a serial killer and therefore do not realize the possible danger lurking in plain view. The FBI places serial killers into three categories: organized, disorganized, and mixed. Serial murder, by definition, is usually reserved for incidents in which an individual or individuals kills two or more victims in separate events. Criminologists have different opinions on the traits of serial killers. I have studied articles from criminologists and the FBI serial murder page to help identify a serial murder. Today I will be outlining 5 key traits the most notorious murderers have in common. First, I would start by telling you that serial killers are not limited to a certain race, gender, or physical profile. They are not usually troublemakers or persons of interest in other criminal investigations. Many times, serial killers are well-respected pillars of the community. The first trait of a serial killer is a power junkie. They have an affinity for power. They like to have control over those around them. Prime examples of this type of killer were Ted Bundy, Ian Brady, and Myra Hindley. They were like a team of serial murderers. Now that we have learned the first trait of a serial killer, we will discuss a trait that is probably the most common: the manipulator, the need to please, and vulnerability used effectively by a killer in an effort to hide sinister personality. Some of the best serial killers are manipulators. They like to pass the blame for their actions on to others. Example of this would be Dr. Harold Shipman, who was a medical expert. Of course, he was a doctor. He would trick his patients into treatments that ultimately killed them. Next, I will tell you about another organized trait of a serial killer that can frustrate authorities. Egotistical serial killers brag about their atrocities they've committed, and they're aimed at anyone that they can brag to. Brady and Hindley, I mentioned before, are also examples of egotistical. They revisited the burial site of a particular set of murders that they committed and took pictures in the same places they killed the victims. Jack the Ripper was also an example of an egotistical serial killer. He wrote letters to the authorities, often mocking them and challenging them, basically saying, "You're not going to get me." Of course, serial killers who are egotistical usually get caught by the same method. You may think that all serial killers are dark and closed off from society. However, many of them may be someone you never expect. The superficial charmer is good at playing on emotions of victims who are vulnerable and weak. He convinces them to do things normally they wouldn't do. Ted Bundy, was an excellent example of a charmer. Of course, I told you the story earlier about how he would lure the women to a vehicle with a fake cast and then knock them out with a tire iron, take them to an undisclosed location, rape them, then kill them, then take them to another location and drop the body off. Superficial charmers often have high IQs. It's another example of a good organized killer. Finally, the hardest trait to identify when profiling a serial killer is an average Joe. Scariest trait of all normally is the pillar of the community. People who live in the same neighborhoods as you are able to gain the trust of everyone and abuse it in gruesome ways. Maybe political figures or prominent business leaders or avid churchgoers in the community. An example is Wayne Gacy, also known as the Killer Clown. Very active politically in his local Chicago suburb. Of course, he raped and murdered young boys and buried them in his yard. Fred and Rose West were average people in the United Kingdom who were raped and killed young women for years and buried them in their garden. In conclusion, knowing a little about the traits of a serial killer may be advantageous to everyone. Serial killers may have many traits, but there are 5 that are the most common. Today I've reviewed some important traits when profiling a serial killer: power junkie, manipulator, egotistical, superficial charmer, and average Joe. Imagine being an innocent young lady who meets a charming, manipulative, average Joe who has intentions of luring you to his vehicle to beat you and kidnap you. Then he rapes you and murders you while your family and authorities cannot catch up to the egotistical, cold-blooded killer who is mocking them. In this crazy, unstoppable world in which we live, a serial killer may be lurking while profilers desperately seek to unlock the deadly mystery. Thank you.